In October of 2017, an elongated shadow slipped into our solar system from the outside. Its name was Oumuamua. It was extremely long and thin, like a cigar, and it tumbled through interstellar space at high speed, its spin erratic and irregular. Its surface showed a mirror-like specular reflection, and the fluctuations in its light curve were unusually large. This suggested a combination of an extreme shape and complex changes in its orientation. A natural celestial body would typically have a rough surface of ice, rock, and dust. But observations detected a nearly specular highlight, almost like a polished surface. When thermal models were applied, the temperature difference between its day and night size was smaller than usual, raising the possibility of a scorched or metallized film on its surface. The discovery was initiated by an optical survey in Hawaii, and subsequent multi-wavelength tracking revealed that its reflectivity's dependence on wavelength did not match that of a typical comet. Researchers in Japan proposed a hypothesis that long-term exposure to interstellar cosmic rays had compacted its surface. In any case, it was difficult to fit it neatly into the conventional image of a natural fragment. The core of the mystery was the non-gravitational acceleration observed after it passed the sundae. Its speed increased, yet there was no visible outgassing. If sublimating jets of gas were producing thrust, a visible coma or chemical signatures would have been present, but none were detected. Avi Loeb of Harvard University proposed the solar sail hypothesis, suggesting it was being pushed by the pressure of photons. The logic was that an object with a wide, reflective, yet extremely thin surface could gain continuous, albeit weak, thrust. Counter-arguments emerged, with some suggesting it was a solid hydrogen iceberg or a nitrogen fragment, while others attempted to explain it with an extreme Yarkovsky effect. However, contradictions remained regarding its thermal sustainability, the astrophysical plausibility of its source, and the consistency of its reflection spectrum. Another possibility considered was a model where electromagnetic coupling with the solar wind plasma exerted a subtle torque on its orientation and momentum. But to reproduce the observed direction and magnitude of acceleration over the long term, natural processes alone lack the necessary degrees of freedom. At this stage, the crucial realization was that the lack of a visible propulsion trail was in itself data. There was thrust, but no trace. This is where the potential to transcend the conventional framework was born. And then, 8 years later, a third interstellar visitor crossed the boundary. Oumuamua was followed by Borisov, and this new object was recorded as the third confirmed case. But the initial impressions from its light curve and spectroscopy were not in the same class as the first two. The way its activity began, its reflective properties, the stability of its rotation, it was a statistical outlier from any known catalog. A wide-field survey quickly determined its initial trajectory, and radio and optical instruments around the world began to build a time series of data. What the data starkly revealed were not the signs of a passive traveler passing through, as assumed by the textbooks of celestial mechanics, but rather the subtle yet consistent signs of dynamic, controlled mechanical variations. From this point on, we enter a phase where we must move beyond the lens of natural physics and squarely address the additional factors at play. Whether it's attitude control to manage solar radiation pressure, using the resistance of interstellar plasma for braking, or coupling with charged particle streams, all of these require extremely delicate conditions. That is precisely why we must expand our observation network, washing away the systemic errors that accompany our estimations and narrowing down the space of possible hypotheses. The phenomenon that will appear in the next section was not seen in the preceding two examples. and it will stretch our assumptions even further. The visitor from outside our solar system, 3, I divided by Atlas, is exhibiting behavior unlike any arrival we have ever seen. Whereas Oumuamua accelerated as it moved away from the Sun, this object, in stark contrast, is slightly slowing down as it gets closer. In the light of basic physics, this is a nearly impossible phenomenon. Normally, solar radiation pressure works to push an object away, increasing its speed, and yet 3 I divided by Atlas is decelerating. A research group from the University of Tokyo has pointed to the possibility of a new physical phenomenon caused by a resonance between the solar wind and the object's electromagnetic field. Meanwhile, NASA researchers are analyzing whether a highly advanced reflective structure on its surface might be controlling the direction of the solar pressure's force. If this estimation is correct, it implies that this is not a mere comet, but that some form of intentional mechanism is at work. The principles of celestial motion we have believed in for so long are now, right before our eyes, being quietly overturned. A natural comet accelerates when it approaches the Sun due to the force of radiation. Its ice sublimates, the outgassing of jets creates a reaction, and this propulsion is common sense. Oumuamua also accelerated without a visible coma, but its direction was consistent with the influence of natural solar radiation pressure. However, 3 I divided by Atlas is repeatedly exhibiting a phenomenon in the observation data called micro-deceleration. Very gradually, but consistently, its velocity is decreasing. According to analysis from the European Space Agency, its deceleration is estimated to be around 0.3 kilometers per second. This has been reported as a definite change that exceeds the margin of error. Astronomers in Germany and Russia have pointed out that this behavior could suggest artificial control. If the object is controlling its own speed, it might be an expression of an intent to stay longer in the solar system to conduct observation or exploration. The very concept of an interstellar visitor is being rewritten from its foundations. The phenomenon currently being observed could become the first ever proof that an extraterrestrial technology is actively navigating within our solar system. The movement of 3 I divided by Atlas is too smooth and sustained to be explained by natural forces alone. According to high-precision spectroscopic data from the Subaru telescope, the period of its surface reflection is almost constant, showing a stability that suggests it is being controlled. Researchers at Harvard University stated that maintaining such a stable axis of rotation would require external torque correction and is extremely unlikely for a natural object. Furthermore, a report from China's Purple Mountain Observatory claims that a faint plasma glow was observed during its deceleration. Whether this is a byproduct of propulsion or an unknown electromagnetic reaction is unclear. However, the mere fact that multiple independent observation networks have recorded the same behavior makes the abnormality of the situation clear. This is no longer just a piece of a star. It is an object bearing the marks of intelligent design, carving a new page in the history of the cosmos. The behavior of a normal comet approaching the Sun is extremely predictable. Solar radiation heats the ice, and sublimation causes gas to be ejected. The reaction from this gas creates a small propulsive force, pushing the comet away from the Sunday. In other words, acceleration is the law of nature itself. This is a law established from thousands of comet observations as the foundation of classical astrophysics. But the movement of 3 I divided by Atlas completely betrays it. It is exhibiting behavior that makes it seem as if solar radiation pressure is causing deceleration instead of acceleration. Solar physicists at NASA have recorded this phenomenon as a deceleration process that cannot be explained by known physics. The research team at the University of Tokyo has pointed to the possibility of a highly specific electromagnetic interference occurring between the solar wind and the comet's charged particles, proposing a hypothesis that a field inversion is creating a weak braking effect. On the other hand, a joint German and Russian study has cautiously suggested this movement could be under external control. If intentional control is being exercised, it would not be a natural phenomenon, but a kinematic manipulation by some designed agent. The thousands of comets observed until now have, without exception, accelerated. Oumuamua also accelerated without a visible coma, confusing scientists, but its direction of travel was consistently aligned with solar radiation. In other words, while it was unnatural, it did not completely deviate from the framework of theory. But the behavior of 3I divided by Atlas is fundamentally different. It is decelerating. According to observation data, its speed is slightly decreasing the closer it gets to the Sun, and a clear pattern exceeding statistical error has been confirmed. An analysis from Harvard University concludes that this deceleration suggests sustained control by an external force. Furthermore, spectroscopic observation by Japan's Subaru telescope indicates that faint plasma emissions are periodically occurring from its surface, which could be playing a role in propulsion or resistance. Such a phenomenon of continuous control does not fit anywhere in existing cometary dynamics. Physically, solar radiation exerts a force that pushes an object away from the sunday. Gravity, conversely, pulls it in, but the result is an increase in speed. Therefore, no natural mechanism exists that would show sustained deceleration. But 3I divided by Atlas is making the impossible a reality. The consistent speed reduction shown by the observation data is not mere measurement error or atmospheric interference, but a change in motion with a clear directionality, as reported by the analysis team at the European Space Agency. Researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences have also confirmed faint electromagnetic pulses observed concurrently with the deceleration, stating that they might be analogous to propulsion signals or attitude control signals. Putting these results together, the possibility emerges that 3I divided by Atlas is not just a celestial body, but something that is adjusting its own movement within the solar system. Its existence, which transcends the laws of nature, is slowly changing its motion in silence, as if to test our very understanding of physics. The acceleration of a comet is caused by the outgassing of sublimating ice, the so-called outjet. This pushes material from the nucleus, becoming the propulsive force that moves it away from the sunday. Gravity does the opposite, pulling the object toward the sun while increasing its speed. Therefore, the phenomenon of deceleration belongs to neither of these two mechanics. In our current understanding of celestial dynamics, no natural mechanism exists to brake a high-speed object moving through interplanetary space. But 3I divided by Atlas is moving as if to overturn that common sense. The gravitational dynamics team at the University of Tokyo has considered the possibility that a weak interaction with the magnetosphere's plasma is creating an electromagnetic drag in the opposite direction of normal. NASA researchers have presented a hypothesis that interference with charged particles in the solar wind forms a temporary electrical structure around the comet, resulting in a speed decrease. Furthermore, according to an analysis by Germany's Max Planck Institute, the deceleration pattern of Atlas has a periodicity that cannot be reproduced by simple friction or gas release. The trace of a quiet control, unexplainable by the forces of the natural world, may be lurking there. As if to support this, independent observatories from around the world are reporting the same results. The spectroscopic velocity measurements from the James Webb Space Telescope, the trajectory analysis from ground-based radar tracking networks, and the Doppler shift data from the Mars orbiter all have indicated an impossible deceleration. From September 23rd to 26th, 2025, the relative velocity of 3i divided by Atlas to the Sun changed from 68.2 kilometers per second to 67.9 kilometers per second. This speed decrease was independently confirmed by joint observations between Japan's Subaru telescope and the European Space Agency, and it far exceeds the range of measurement error. An analysis by the Indian Space Research Organization showed a subtle shift in the radiation spectrum at the same time as the velocity change, suggesting a change in the plasma state. In other words, the possibility of external control or autonomous adjustment. There has never been a past case where the observation results of so many different nations have matched to this degree. That velocity change is a mere 0.3 kilometers per second. As a number, it is minuscule, but statistically, it is extremely meaningful. Normally, velocity changes due to observation errors or atmospheric fluctuations are scattered randomly around an average value. But this time, the deceleration has a clear directionality. This is not just a natural fluctuation. Dr. Avi Loeb of Harvard University analyzes that this consistent change cannot be explained by anything other than artificial maneuvering with a propulsive force or interference by unknown physics. NASA's Solar Physics Division has also triple-checked the data's integrity and reported that the probability of natural factors is less than 1%. At the French National Center for Space Studies, they are focusing on the fact that the timing of the deceleration matches the period of minor fluctuations in solar activity, stating that if there is external control, it may be using the Sun's magnetic field itself for navigational assistance. The movement of 3i divided by Atlas in the silence of space looks as if someone is tracing a deliberately designed trajectory. The deceleration is not a one-time event. It has persisted across the observation window. The slope of the velocity time series is consistently negative, and it cannot be explained by the random scatter of noise. Even after cross-calibrating the data from multiple sites and removing systemic instrument errors, the trend remained. It was also factored into the Solar Activity Index and the 0-point fluctuations of the radial velocity correction standards. Avi Loeb of Harvard University declared this to be conclusive evidence. Nature does not produce a sustained deceleration at this rate. Either unknown physics are at work, or an artificial object equipped with active propulsion is adjusting its orbit. A representative from the University of Tokyo explained that in their statistical model selection, the Bayesian evidence for the natural hypothesis has plummeted. NASA's analysis team emphasized the point that even when smoothed with a Kalman filter, the signal-to-noise ratio of the deceleration continues to rise. Researchers in Germany and India point out that the observation networks are highly independent, making it difficult to dismiss as a cross-error. In my assessment, this is not a binary choice. It could be a composite mechanism where electromagnetic coupling with the solar wind acts as a virtual resistance, and based on that, attitude control maximizes the gain. But the smoothness of that control efficiency still makes one feel the trace of design. Let's look at the comparison carefully. Oumuamua was observed to have an acceleration of about 0.44 kilometers per second. The direction of the thrust differed from predictions, prolonging the debate, but as a sign, it was pro-solar radiation. In contrast, 3i divided by Atlas showed a deceleration of 0.3 kilometers per second in an impossible direction. The magnitude is slightly smaller. The difference is telling. The problem is not the scalar value, but the vector. The velocity is systematically dropping with a sign and direction that a natural mechanism cannot take. This is outside the textbook. A dynamics group in Russia reported that the decrease in the velocity norm is dominant over the rotation of the momentum vector. An analysis in France shows the possibility that the timing of the deceleration is synchronized with its attitude phase. A spectroscopy team in China has found a correlation between the faint environmental changes of charged particles and the velocity change. In my view, the essence here lies in the betrayal of direction. Nature pushes, gravity pulls. Both make things faster, and yet it gets slower. This single fact transcends all existing explanations. So, let's examine the three most plausible mechanisms in order. First, an inverse solar sail. By holding a wide, reflective surface at a subtle angle to the sun, it functions as a cosmic parachute against the photon stream. The necessary conditions are an extremely thin body with a high surface-to-mass ratio and long-term attitude stability. A joint evaluation by the University of Tokyo and Harvard University concluded that the observed stability of the reflection period is difficult to achieve with passive tumbling rotation. Second, a plasma magnetic sail. This is an electromagnetic drag that deploys an electrical structure or a weak magnetic field to capture ions from the solar wind and exchange momentum. NASA's solar physics team points to the fact that faint plasma indicators rise during the deceleration phases as a sign of it being active. Third, a combination of low output ion propulsion and minute torque. The exhaust would be dark and difficult to see with optical telescopes, but with continuous operation, the total integrated thrust could theoretically achieve an adjustment on the order of 0.3 kilometers per second. A propulsion engineer in Germany calculated that if the required power is supplied by solar intake during its approach to the sun and stored energy is released on the night side, long-term self-sufficiency could be established. Each of these proposals has strict requirements. Even so, all three proposals assume control. I believe what the observations are pointing to is not a single mechanism, but a complex navigation system that reads the environment and optimizes the deceleration gain. A design disguised as nature or a sophisticated craft that weaves through the margins of natural law. This quiet deceleration seems like a technological choice to leave a definite trace without making its presence overly conspicuous. For this hypothesis to be valid, it requires extremely precise angular control relative to the sunlight. An attitude with a precision of less than a few degrees relative to the direction of incoming light must be maintained. Otherwise, the inverse solar sail effect from the light pressure will not be stable. But surprisingly, the results of spectroscopic observation showed that the surface of 3I divided by Atlas has a much higher reflectivity than a normal comet. It has optical properties like a metallic mirror, and its reflection efficiency hardly changes with wavelength. A joint study by Japan's Subaru Telescope and Harvard University reported that the spectral pattern of its reflectivity is close to that of a multi-layer coating on an artificial material. NASA's James Webb Space Telescope also confirmed this abnormal optical uniformity. But here, a critical problem arises. A natural celestial body's orientation should rotate chaotically, and it should not be able to maintain a stable direction. The orientation of comets and asteroids is disturbed by the solar wind and micro-collisions, and their axis of rotation changes in a matter of hours or days. However, 3I divided by Atlas maintained a rotation period so precise that observers described it as having mathematical accuracy. The fluctuation in its angular velocity was less than 0.1%. This is a stability that is impossible for a natural rotating body. Professor Hitoshi Murayama of the University of Tokyo pointed out that this stability implies the existence of either inertial control or an internal torque correction, suggesting the possibility of an automatic control element in its internal structure. Researchers at the German Aerospace Center also suggested the possibility that a magnetic mechanism is at work to compensate for external torque. If this is correct, the probability that 3I divided by Atlas is not a mere natural object, but a controlled observation device or a self-correcting spacecraft increases. Furthermore, as a second theory, the existence of an electromagnetic propulsion system with a thrust so faint that it cannot be observed from Earth is being considered. A thrust system that combines plasma magnetic manipulation and ion propulsion without visible plumes. This would make it possible to perform sustained motion control from within while appearing stationary from the outside. NASA solar physicists have identified the green glow drifting around Atlas as the emission of ionized plasma and have reported detecting an unknown electromagnetic wave pattern. The French National Observatory has pointed to the possibility that this green light is a plasma field for manipulating charged particles from the solar wind. A research team from the Chinese Academy of Sciences also observed similar spectral lines during the same period and confirmed that the period of the emission is constant. I believe this light is not just a natural emission, but a visualization of a control cycle similar to the heartbeat of a spacecraft, as if someone in the quiet of space is steadily communicating their presence. The biggest challenge is the energy supply for propulsion. To change velocity on this scale, a power source capable of sustained operation for theoretically thousands of years is required. This is a condition that is utterly impossible for a natural object. NASA researchers have analyzed that this cannot be explained by existing nuclear or solar power and have posited the existence of an unknown high-density energy storage structure. Meanwhile, the Celestial Dynamics Group at the University of Tokyo is considering a third theory, gravity manipulation that precisely utilizes the gravity of planets. This is a method where the object, when passing near a planet, slightly manipulates its gravity to adjust its orbital energy. Russian space physicists have pointed out the fact that a velocity change occurs every time Atlas passes a planet and have emphasized that the probability of this being a coincidence is extremely low. A research team in the United States also analyzed that the periodicities seen in the observation data cannot be reproduced by the influence of gravity alone. Whether the origin of the energy lies outside the laws of physics, or whether a technology exists that utilizes gravity beyond what is known, either way, Atlas is certainly a demonstration of a power principle that transcends the natural realm. On October 3rd, 2025, 3I divided by Atlas passed in the vicinity of Mars. Immediately after, a minute but definite change in its velocity was observed. It is predicted that a more significant orbital adjustment could occur during its approach to Jupiter in March of 2026. This movement, which uses the gravitational field like a springboard, can theoretically be interpreted as a type of navigation technology. However, statistical analysis has revealed that the probability of this timing coinciding by chance is less than 1 in 50,000. A joint research team from the University of Tokyo and the German Aerospace Center has confirmed that this phenomenon clearly deviates from the probability distribution of a natural planetary encounter. NASA's Dynamics Division also re-verified the data and reported that there is an orbital coincidence that cannot be explained by chance. If this is a natural phenomenon, it means that an unknown regulating force is at work in outer space. But if it is artificial control, it means that 3I divided by Atlas is designing its own trajectory by utilizing gravity. There is no longer any doubt that this celestial body is not a mere drifter in space. 3I divided by Atlas is not a passive object to be observed, but is moving with a clear intent. Its deceleration and orbital corrections are not accidental, but show the traces of operations based on meticulous calculations. British astronomers call this movement a loitering deceleration and analyze it as a strategic action to extend its observation period within the solar system. Spectroscopic observation by the Chinese Academy of Sciences shows that during deceleration, the radiation spectrum changes with a constant period suggesting the possibility of some kind of communication or environmental measurement signal. Avi Loeb of Harvard University said that 3I divided by Atlas is behaving not as a visitor, but as a resident. As if it is building a base in the solar system, its actions are planned and are not a momentary whim. Its trajectory, which extends its orbit while slowing down, is nothing other than that of something with the intent to observe and investigate. The realization that an unknown intelligence is quietly setting foot in our garden is now becoming a reality. The factor that distinguishes 3I divided by Atlas from previous interstellar visitors is not just the difference in its behavior. The continuity of its peculiarity shows signs of a phased escalation lurking in the depths of space. In 2017, the first to appear, Oumuamua, showed an inexplicable acceleration as it moved away from the Sunday. The direction was an extension of natural radiation pressure, but the cause of the propulsion remained unexplained. Professor Hitoshi Murayama of the University of Tokyo said at the time that it was not a product of chance, but an entity that utilized the laws of physics. NASA's analysis also confirmed that its reflective properties and shape data were different from those of a normal comet, but the observation period was short and no conclusion was reached. Dr. Avi Loeb of Harvard University stated that Oumuamua left with a question. Atlas appeared with the answer. No coma was observed on Oumuamua, and it was quiet like a cold piece of rock. Its long, cigar-shaped silhouette temporarily supported the natural explanation that it was a fragment scattered by a collision of distant planets. But it was only observable for a mere 11 days. Within that short window, the object disappeared from view, and it was impossible to see it again. According to an analysis by the German Aerospace Center, there were no traces of artificial attitude control in its movement, and it looked like a drifter flying away by inertia. On the other hand, a research team from the Russian Academy of Sciences pointed to a slight change in the remaining data and could not rule out the possibility that the axis of rotation was intentionally adjusted. It was not completely natural, nor could it be definitively determined to be completely artificial. That ambiguity itself may have been a foreshadowing of the next visitor. And then, in 2025, 3I divided by Atlas appeared, this time in the opposite direction. That is, it showed deceleration, not acceleration. A movement that defies the laws of physics, slowing down while being pulled in by the Sunday. Moreover, in contrast to the quietness of Oumuamua, Atlas showed active behavior. The chemical composition of its coma had an unprecedented abnormality. It was not composed of water ice as a main component, but 95% carbon dioxide. According to a spectral analysis by NASA, its gas contained traces of organic molecules different from the environment of normal comet formation. A researcher at the French National Observatory announced that the possibility that this chemical composition was formed in an artificial environment cannot be ruled out. An observation team from the Chinese Academy of Sciences also detected a periodic pattern in the reflectivity fluctuations within the coma, and they speculate that it may be a trace of energy control. 3I divided by Atlas is not a mere visitor. It has begun to interfere with the laws of the universe itself, as if to assert its own existence. The analysis results of 3I divided by Atlas have shaken the foundations of known cometary physics. Composed of 95% carbon dioxide, it has chemical characteristics completely different from normal comets, which are mainly water ice. The estimation of its mass density suggests the possibility that its interior is hollow, which is inconsistent with the model of a natural celestial body formed by gravitational collapse. According to spectroscopic observation by NASA, the periodicity of its radiation intensity implies the existence of an internal resonance structure. A research team at the University of Tokyo has pointed out the possibility that the internal cavity is not just a physical defect, but a resonance space involved in energy distribution or attitude control. Also, the observation is not a one-time event, but has been continuously conducted for several months. During that time, Atlas has passed the orbital planes of Venus, Mars, and Jupiter at exquisite timings, and the probability of error is less than 1 in 50,000. An orbital analysis by the German Aerospace Center concluded that this overly precise path is not a coincidence, but is due to some navigation plan. A precision that makes the probability theory of nature collapse exists there. Oumuamua was an object that tested our observation capabilities. It highlighted the blind spots of our detection systems and showed the limits of our observation technology. But 3I divided by Atlas is testing our physics itself. Its position has changed from a mere object of observation to a verifier of cosmic laws. Professor Hitoshi Murayama of the University of Tokyo stated that this phenomenon is an endurance test of theoretical physics, and it seems as if the universe is measuring our ability to understand. The first visitor, Oumuamua, was described as strange, and the second visitor, Borisov, was called an anomaly. But Atlas has surpassed that stage and has stepped into the realm of the impossible. A theory group at NASA reported that they cannot rule out the possibility that Atlas is not just a natural phenomenon, but an experimental probe on a cosmic scale. For the first time in observation history, a celestial body may be testing our system of perception in reverse. In the face of the third visitor, the scientific community is facing an unprecedented shock. In 2017, when Dr. Avi Loeb of Harvard University proposed that Oumuamua was an artificial structure, he was ridiculed by many of his colleagues. But now, after finishing the analysis of 3I divided by Atlas, he says that his initial hypothesis was modest. Dr. Loeb emphasized that the observation results this time show that Oumuamua was merely a precursor. Atlas is the next stage, the evidence of intelligent design. Not only Harvard University, but also the University of Tokyo and the Indian Space Research Organization have announced similar views, and the probability of a natural origin has been calculated to be less than 30%. The French National Observatory commented that Atlas is an observer and at the same time an observed entity. This is not just an astronomical event. The possibility that the universe is showing its own intelligence to humanity. We are now beginning to accept that reality. According to the latest statistical analysis, the probability that 3I divided by Atlas is of natural origin has plummeted to just 30 to 40%. This number, which has dropped significantly from the initial estimate of 90%, can no longer be explained by coincidence. Dr. Avi Loeb of Harvard University states that if Oumuamua was a warning, then Atlas is the confirmation. NASA's analysis team also considers the consistency of Atlas's orbital changes and velocity decrease as evidence of artificial control. Japanese astronomers have shown the view that this is a sign that the solar system is being observed by an external intelligence. Professor Hitoshi Murayama of the University of Tokyo says that we have been observing the universe for a long time, but now we may be on the side of being observed. In 13 days, all speculation will come to an end. Whether 3I divided by Atlas is a natural fragment or an entity sent by the designers of the universe, the time when the answer will be revealed is approaching. From October 29th to 31st, during the perihelion test, Atlas will make its closest approach to the Sun, and its distance will be about 1.36 astronomical units just inside the orbit of Mars. There, it'll be subjected to the maximum level of solar radiation and thermal shock. Normally, when a comet is exposed to this extreme environment, its response is almost determined. The sublimation of ice proceeds rapidly, creating a large pressure difference in the internal structure. Many comets disintegrate at this stage, losing their brilliance while scattering multiple fragments. But the surface composition of Atlas is not normal ice or dust, but is composed of a mixture of highly reflective carbonate crystals and metallic substances, and its resistance to solar heat is very high. In a thermal stress simulation by NASA, the probability that this object will completely disintegrate is calculated to be less than 5%. A German research team measured the reflected light intensity near the Sun and confirmed thermal stress characteristics different from those of a normal comet. In other words, Atlas has a design that is meant to endure. A natural comet will either disintegrate due to the high stress caused by the heat, or volatile substances will erupt to form a huge tail. But if 3I divided by Atlas survives this harsh passage in its complete form, NASA has announced that at that point, the possibility of an artificial origin will exceed 70%. Furthermore, if it shows deceleration again during this passage, the so-called impossible braking maneuver, it will be decisive evidence. The French National Observatory commented that if this phenomenon is confirmed, it will be the moment when navigation by extraterrestrial technology is officially proven. The latest data from the Indian Space Research Organization also analyzes that if a minute velocity change is reproduced after the perihelion passage, it can be determined to be an intentional operation. I want to call this phenomenon the judgment of the Sunday under the light of the greatest truth in the universe, the Sun. Will Atlas be able to hide its true identity? Or will the moment come when humanity witnesses their existence for the first time? The answer will soon be told by the universe itself. What we are discussing is no longer a natural object. Let's consider the 3 possible outcomes for 3I divided by Atlas. The first scenario is disintegration. That is, the case where it breaks apart like a normal comet. Its structure is destroyed by the intense solar heat, and it diffuses along its orbit while releasing several fragments. Observationally, we should see the fragments scattering while drawing slightly different orbits. In a model by NASA's solar physics team, the outer shell of Atlas is prone to rapid expansion under high temperatures, and in this case, a typical gas jet type disintegration is expected. A researcher at the University of Tokyo calls this the most plausible end through a natural destructive process. If so, the mystery this time will be summarized as a temporary phenomenon caused by a special chemical composition and a coincidental orbital arrangement. That is the conclusion of the first scenario. Scientists will breathe a sigh of relief and be relieved that it could be explained within the range of nature after all. But if it does not disintegrate, that is the second scenario. If Atlas survives in its complete form despite the extreme thermal environment, it is not just a miracle. It means that its structural strength or internal design exceeds the framework of a natural celestial body. In NASA's mass distribution data, an anomaly has been detected that suggests the density inside Atlas is not uniform, but indicates a hollow structure. Dr. Avi Loeb of Harvard University commented that this is not just a cavity, but suggests the existence of an internally reinforced skeletal structure. In a report from the German Aerospace Center, a spatial resonance structure was also confirmed from the delay pattern of the reflected waves. An asymmetry that cannot be explained by natural formation has been found. If this second scenario is realized, the door to an artificial origin will be completely opened. And the third scenario, the most eerie and shocking development. That 3I divided by Atlas will use its perihelion to perform a maneuver. This technique, which aerospace engineering experts call the Oberth maneuver, is a method of redesigning an orbit with minimum energy by using the Sun's gravitational field. NASA's Dynamics Division defines this theory as the most efficient navigation method within the solar system. An analysis by the Chinese Academy of Sciences showed that the perihelion passage angle and velocity change of Atlas have a precision that seems as if they were calculated. If this action is confirmed, it will be evidence of intentional orbital control, not a natural coincidence. Professor Hitoshi Murayama of the University of Tokyo stated that this movement presupposes the existence of a pilot, not an observer. The team at the French National Observatory also agrees and has concluded that 3I divided by Atlas is not passing the Sun, but is using the Sunday. In other words, the third scenario is a demonstration of space navigation, and it may be the moment when humanity first encounters gravity control by an intelligent being. 3I divided by Atlas appears to be designed to make maximum use of the Sun's gravitational field and change its orbit with minimum energy. This movement feels like a clear intention, suggesting that it is not just a passerby, but an entity intending to stay in the solar system for a long time. In a dynamics model by NASA, this gravity slingshot operation is reproduced as an advanced navigation pattern that integrates both acceleration and deceleration during its approach to the Sunday. A research group at the University of Tokyo is analyzing that this is as if it is using the Sun's gravity as navigation fuel, and they strongly view it as a movement based on an artificial design. After passing its perihelion on December 19th, it will pass at a distance of 167 million miles from Earth. At that time, it is predicted to maintain a brightness that can be observed even with amateur telescopes. A researcher at the German Aerospace Center stated that this is not a natural object, but the orbit of an intentional long-term observation mission. This celestial body, which came from the edge of the solar system, is now confronting us with the concept of settlement, not passage. If the deceleration trend continues after this, the answer will be decisive. In March of 2026, 3I divided by Atlas is scheduled to approach the vicinity of Jupiter via an orbit outside of Mars. There, it will use gravitational interaction again to bend its orbit. If a second orbital change is confirmed, it will mean that it is not a natural phenomenon, but completely artificial navigation. A joint observation mission between NASA and the European Space Agency, JUICE, is scheduled to observe this Jupiter approach from a close distance, and plans are underway to record detailed spectroscopic data and velocity changes. According to an analysis by the Indian Space Research Organization, the motion of Atlas has already passed through multiple calculated gravitational points, and its degree of coincidence cannot be explained by chance. Russian astronomers have stated that Atlas is a prototype of an interstellar spacecraft or the observation device itself. If this estimation is correct, we are observing, for the first time in the history of the solar system, an object that has its own will. We are now living in an era where we may be confirming the existence of interstellar technology in real time. Whereas we missed the opportunity for detailed research before Oumuamua disappeared, 3I divided by Atlas has allowed observation for several months. This is not just good luck. It seems as if it is a design based on the premise of being observed from somewhere in the universe. Dr. Avi Loeb of Harvard University says that Atlas is a test for humanity. It is testing how far the intelligence of the universe will be understood. Professor Hitoshi Murayama of the University of Tokyo also commented that this celestial body is simultaneously confronting us with the limits of physics and the intellectual arrogance of humanity. An analysis by NASA has shown that the orbit and deceleration behavior of Atlas consistently contradict the known physical models of the solar system, and the possibility that it is a design contradiction, not an accident, has been pointed out. An existence beyond the frame of our understanding is quietly intervening in the order of this solar system. Science is now at a point where it must admit that reality, a celestial body that should be accelerating as it approaches the sun, is, on the contrary, slowing down. 3I divided by Atlas is making a movement that should be random look, as if it were intentionally calculated. The precision of its timing, the smoothness of its trajectory, and the consistency of its deceleration. All of these suggest an action aimed at observation. NASA's observation team reported that it may not be a mere passerby, but an entity whose purpose is the act of observation itself. A research team at the University of Tokyo is also analyzing that there is a possibility that it is using the solar system as an experimental site. Dr. Avi Loeb of Harvard University said that even if it is not an artificial object, Atlas is an entity that will make humanity redefine its physical common sense. In other words, beyond whether it is natural or artificial, this celestial body has already created a turning point from a universe that is observed to a universe that observes. The greatest impact that 3I divided by Atlas has brought is not in science itself, but in the structure of human consciousness. We have long confined the concept of aliens and visitors from the stars to the category of science fiction. But this celestial body has quietly destroyed the boundary between imagination and reality. A certain researcher said this year that science is a series of courageous acts of verifying the unknown without fear. Professor Murayama also commented that the universe does not give humanity answers, but gives the courage to continue asking questions. According to an analysis by the French National Observatory, the actions of Atlas are testing the limits of rationality. The universe does not promise simplicity, but it shows a fragment of the truth only to those who explore it with sincerity. 3I divided by Atlas is now presenting one of those fragments before us. On October 29th, 2025, on that day, 3I divided by Atlas will get closest to the Sunday. At that moment, all observers on Earth will face one question. Is this a product of nature, or is it something sent by the hand of intelligence? A researcher at the German Aerospace Center states that whichever the answer is, humanity's view of the universe will be changed forever. We have not yet unraveled the question that Oumuamua posed, but 3I divided by Atlas has appeared as its sequel. According to a report from the Russian Academy of Sciences, the behavior of Atlas matches the traces of an observational visit by an interstellar civilization. The universe is trying to show the answer in silence. And we are, for the first time, trying to hear the meaning of that silence. 3I divided by Atlas has fundamentally updated the conventional image of a comet. Deceleration in a phase where it should accelerate, temporal precision shown in an arrangement that should be coincidental, and orbital adjustment as if to intentionally extend the observation window. None of these were single events, but were accompanied by the consistency of a time series. The observation networks were independently consistent across multiple nations, and the noise hypothesis was rejected. The conclusions are divided in two. One is the extended natural theory that an unknown physical interaction is creating a virtual resistance at the boundary of the solar wind, electromagnetic field, and charged particle streams, implementing the deceleration. The other is the active control theory that a navigation system that reads the external environment and optimizes the gain is at work. In my evaluation, the smoothness of the data and the phase synchronization make me lean toward the latter. But what is important is not the label, but the single point that the observed facts are forcing a revision on the theory side. Oumuamua exposed the blind spots of our observation system. Atlas has exposed the blind spots of our theories. Here, the story moves from explanation to verification, and from verification to the reconstruction of the design concept. The first proposition adopted in this article is composite navigation. The minute angle control of an inverse solar sail, the momentum reception by a plasmamagnetic sail, and the differential correction by ion propulsion. These three individually lack a decisive blow, but in the vicinity of the Sun, the photon stream and the charged particle density are maximized. If the attitude synchronization is overlaid on this, the total thrust vector becomes integrable with the observed sign. A theory group at Harvard University evaluated the upper limit of this composite thrust and showed that an adjustment of 0.3 kilometers per second in the difference is theoretically within reach. The analysis at the University of Tokyo supports from a different system that the stability of the reflection period is difficult with passive tumbling rotation. We go beyond the binary choice of natural or artificial and introduce a third vocabulary, design nature that utilizes natural conditions. This vocabulary is not a conspiracy, but a central bridge to talk about design philosophy. The universe is not an enemy, nor is it a myth. It is a place that allows design. The second hypothesis is gravity surfing. It sheds the Sun's gravitational field at its closest point and updates the curvature of its orbit with minimum energy. It grazes the outer edge of Mars and repeats a course correction in the Jupiter sphere. These are not single slingshots. It is highly likely that they are an orbital design to extend time and expand the observation window. There is an intent here to stay, to observe, to collect. The Japanese side of the analysis reported that the deceleration event, the attitude, and the faint light emission are sometimes synchronized. This indicates the existence of a control law, but it is equivalent to a hunch. The German dynamics team visualized that the velocity deviation, which should regress to the mean if it were a natural scatter, is instead accumulating. I want to place a quiet emotion in this chapter. The universe is not indifferent. It is watching, measuring, recording. We, who thought we were the observers, may have been standing in front of a mirror. We do not rush to a conclusion. We design the verification. The response to the thermal stress at perihelion, the polarization of the reflected light, the subtle fluctuations of the spectroscopic lines, we will acquire these simultaneously. The closest approach to Earth on December 19th will be captured by wideband, narrowband, radio, visible light, and near-infrared multicolor simultaneous spectroscopy. In March of 2026, at Jupiter, we will take the velocity difference immediately after the gravitational interaction. The observations will not be dispersed, but synchronized. The University of Tokyo, NASA, the European Space Agency, India, and China, each agency will use the same method for the same target in the same time window. The statistics will be designed in advance, not after the fact. The prior distribution of the Bayes factor. The conclusion is determined by how you measure. We will change how we measure now. Here, instead of conflict, we place a shared story. To doubt is not to destroy. It is to support with precision. This is the form of courage that Atlas is demanding of us. This story does not end. Rather, this is where it begins. Your perspective is needed. The natural theory is fine. The design theory is fine. The third vocabulary is also fine. I want you to add your argument in your own words. The surprise you felt, the fear that sprouted, the hope you saw, I want you to leave them here. If you thought you wanted to continue this exploration, I would like to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Updates will be made in line with the observation windows. I want you to expand the discussion in the comments. I want you to increase the number of observers by sharing. The universe is not silent. It delivers a faint voice only to those who try to listen. Your single view will make that voice visible. Your participation will turn this verification into reality. Now, I want you to connect this chapter to the next with your hypothesis.